Close to death, Paul Newman asked Joanne Woodward for one final favor. She agreed, but she never imagined how deeply his last request would change her life forever. She thought she knew Paul. She had lived beside him, loved him, fought with him, and built a life with him for nearly half a century. But his last request surprised even her. Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward seemed unshakable, a Hollywood marriage that somehow survived fame, temptation, and decades of relentless attention. To the public, they were graceful, timeless, almost perfect. But behind the scenes, their story was shaped by quiet battles, small miracles, and one moment Joanne kept hidden for years. But to understand why Paul's final request held so much weight, you have to know what came before it, the invisible threads that held them together and nearly tore them apart. By the late 2000s, Paul's health was fading, slowly at first. The man who once raced cars at terrifying speeds now struggled to walk across a room. But Joanne remained steady. She always had been. Friends who visited their Connecticut home described quiet scenes. Joanne sitting beside him for hours, brushing his hair back, whispering jokes only he could hear. Sometimes they would laugh. Sometimes they would sit in silence, communicating in a language built over decades. She never left his side, she wouldn't. Not after everything they had survived together, the doubts, the pressures of fame, the sacrifices of raising a family while the world watched them like characters in a story they never agreed to star in. Yet even after 50 years, there were truths Paul had kept locked away until the final weeks of his life. One night, when the house was quiet and the only sound was the hum of the bedside machine, Paul reached for Joanne's hand. His voice was faint, but his words sharp, deliberate. He asked her for something he had never spoken aloud before, a request that stopped her breath. He told her he was afraid, not of dying, not of pain, not of the end. He was afraid of being forgotten, not as a movie star, not as an icon, but as a man, her man. Then he asked her to promise him something. "Don't let the world turn me into a statue," he whispered. "Tell them who I really was, all of me, even the parts I never showed on screen." Joanne felt the weight of those words immediately. For decades, she had protected his privacy fiercely. She knew his brilliance, but also his insecurities, his chaos, his regrets. Revealing them felt like betraying him. But Paul looked at her with a kind of pleading she had never seen from him, not once in 50 years. And so she agreed. Neither of them realized what that promise would truly require. When Paul passed in 2008, the public mourned the legend, the blue-eyed movie star, the perfect gentleman, but Joanne knew there was more and that if she didn't tell it, no one ever would. Still, she didn't rush. Grief slowed her, memories weighed her down. For months, she barely spoke of him publicly. And then, slowly, the promise began working its way back into her heart. She opened old letters, listened to tapes he recorded during darker moments of self-doubt, read journal entries he had written but never shared. She discovered a man who had spent his life wrestling with purpose, guilt, identity, and with the fear that his public image had swallowed his true self. So she began telling the world the real story, not the myth, not the icon, not the flawless legend, but Paul, the man who struggled with alcohol, who questioned his own worth, who adored her with a devotion so deep it frightened him, and who believed she saved his life long before he ever faced death. The more the world began to understand what she had always known. What Joanne didn't realize at his bedside that night was that Paul's final request would become her own lifelong mission. She would spend years shaping his memory, not polishing it, but humanizing it. Books, interviews, documentaries, each reveal carefully chosen, never sensational, always loving. And as she did, the world slowly stopped seeing Paul Newman as a marble statue and began seeing him as a man who loved deeply, doubted constantly, tried fiercely, failed often, and always returned to the woman who understood him better than anyone else on earth. In honoring his final request, Joanne didn't just preserve his memory, she reshaped it. And in doing so, she discovered something she never expected, that the greatest love stories don't always end in death. They continue in the promises we keep.